So where do we want to go from here? What's our goal? Because remember, it's really important to have that in mind because it will affect which options you choose for the kinds of constraints. As we saw, when we started out from one kind of setup and we wanted to switch to something else, it can be a little tricky with having to uninstall and try out different constraints before you figure out which ones you need to delete. Whereas if you know in advance what you want to make, you're going to be able to make smarter decisions up front. So let's decide on what we want it to look like. Now, I like that we have a square. So let's add some stuff relative to that. And I think one fun thing to do would be to add 2 more views inside of it, stacked on top of each other. And not only do I want them to be stacked on top of each other, but let's simulate what we had in the slides. Let's have the one on top be half as tall as the one on the bottom. So that's our goal. So the first thing we want to do, of course, is add 2 more views. So again, to add our views, we want to go down over here. And you can see it may or may not still be selected from the last time you typed in view. If not, you can just type it in again. And we just want to grab this view and drag it onto the scene. Now you can see there's a couple options here. Last time we only had the super view. And here you can see I'm hovering over the super view and it says super view at the bottom and the super view is highlighted in blue. So this would make the new view a child of the super view. But if I move over a little bit, now it's highlighting our red view. And this is what we actually want to do. We want to make these inside of our red view. So doing it this way will make sure that our new view is a child of the red view. And you can see that over here. So we've got our super view, and then the red view is inside of the super view, and now our new view is inside of the red view. So this is important because this has consequences for the constraints that we make regarding this view. So now it will default to aligning itself in certain ways to the red view as opposed to the super view. And we'll see what kind of implications that has later on. And again, you can see here that our white is covering up a lot of our red square right now, and it even looks like our red view has just a really funny shape. So let's go ahead and take our white view and give it a color again. So that's over here on our attributes inspector, coming down to our color. And you can either choose your own custom color, or I'm going to choose a color that I've used recently. This nice blue color, I think. There we go. And you can see it's updating nicely in the live preview. So let's go ahead and manually just resize it a little bit, make some room for us to drop another view on. Just move it around right here. There we go. And let's go ahead and drag in a second one. Now be careful here. You want to, again, make sure it's a child of the red view and not the blue view. There we go. So again, let's give it a different color. I'm going to use purple. All right. And I'll just sort of manually drag it down here to be more out of the way. And you can see over here, it's because these two don't have any constraints yet, it's doing what we saw the red view do before, where it's defaulting to matching the height and the width and the X and Y positions. So you can see in the iPad, it matches pretty closely, at least in terms of being oriented in this upper corner. It's actually doing the same thing down here, but in this case, the blue view happens to be so tall that it pushes the purple view down so that it's not visible. You may be wondering, why isn't it visible? Shouldn't it just be down here in the white space somewhere? Well, the reason for that is, again, because it is a child of the red view. So in the same way that when the red view went off screen from the super view, it's just sort of no longer visible out here in space, it does the same thing when it's the child of another view, where once it gets to the edge, it is clipped. It doesn't overlap, it's no longer visible. And we can see how this would change if we move this one, which is our purple view. If we move it, we can drag it over here to be under the super view instead. Now you can see not only is it now visible, but it also jumped a little bit and now it's behind the red view. And that has to do with the fact that over here, order matters. So whichever view is on top, whatever view is higher, is sort of farther back. It is behind the other views. You can think of it as being farther away from you as the viewer. So if we drag it down here, we can see now it's on top again, and over here you can see it overlaps and extends beyond where the red is. But we do want it to be a child, so I'm going to Command Z a couple times until we get back to where we were. There we go. So now I'm going to re-expand this here. We can see our two views. And just like before we start adding constraints, let's give these some more specific names. So this is our blue view, and this is our purple view. And again, this has no effect on the actual program. It just makes it easier for us as the developer to have better names on our constraints and just generally make it easier for us to remember what's going on. So let's say again in words what it is that we're going for here. We want both of these views to be the same width. So let's just go ahead and add that first. And the way that we do this is up until now we've been control dragging or using the pin menu between one view and the super view. But now we have sort of four things that we could be dragging connections to. So let's try that. Let's control click and we'll drag from purple to blue. So you really want to make sure here, this is again another reason why you want to add those labels to make sure that you're not accidentally selecting red. You definitely want to be selecting blue. So let's do that. And again, it's intelligently deciding what to show us based on the direction that we drag the line, as well as which two objects are we trying to make a relationship between. So the most obvious one that we might be wanting is vertical spacing, like how far apart are these objects? And we'll add that in later, but for now, let's go down here and we want to make sure that they're equal widths. So let's add that. And of course, we've disappeared because we've added a constraint, but we don't have enough information yet. So the great thing about telling the purple view to have the same width as the blue view is that now we don't need to tell the purple view anything about its width because it should just match what the blue is. So now, no matter what size we make our blue view, the purple view should match that width. But one thing that doesn't do is that doesn't necessarily keep the edges aligned. I can drag this blue view over here and this doesn't care. So maybe what we also want to add is some alignment between the two. So you notice when we drag between the two views, we've got these options here. What do those mean? They don't really say much, but what these actually are is alignment. So if we select that left option, now we see we've got this blue bar here and this little I bar here telling us we're not really where we're supposed to be. Now we're not seeing anything in preview, and that's still because we're missing a few constraints. So let's go ahead and do what we did before. We'll just give it some default values. So just selecting the blue one, and it's kind of up in this corner, so that's all right. Let's go down, and we want to add missing constraints. But here you want to be careful now. We want to add missing constraints not to all views, just for the selected view. If we add it to all views, it's going to add constraints for both the blue and the purple. But since we're sort of trying to minimize that, we want to be as flexible as possible, we want purple to be mostly figuring out where it belongs based on the blue one. So let's just add constraints to the blue one. So let's add missing constraints. And now our blue has shown up. It's different on both screens, and that's okay. We've seen this before, and we know how to handle that. But we still don't see our purple. So what's going on there? Well, purple knows that it needs to be the same width as blue, and its leading edge needs to be aligned with the blue's leading edge. But it doesn't know anything about how tall it is. So let's go ahead and just add a constraint from purple to the bottom of the red view. And here we'll do our bottom space to container. There we go. And now we've got our purple. So we can see them both, and this will make it easier for us to fix the rest of our constraints. Things are very different. The front edge is not matching. So let's go ahead and go over here and make sure we're looking at the right constraints. We can kind of close these constraints right now since we don't plan on adjusting anything having to do with the red view and its spacing for the super view. So let's take a look at what we've got. So in here, this is still our aspect ratio and our height for our red view. And starting right here, we've got our blue to our red view, blue to purple. So this is great. This is all of our new stuff down here. So we've got our horizontal spacing to the leading edge of the red view. And here we have the leading alignment from blue to purple. Now, when I added it, my intention was that they would both be aligned. But remember, when you control, click, and drag to add new things, you're just choosing what kind of arrangement, but you don't get to tell it the value. So what it did was it took the existing value, and you can see here it added a constant of -64. Well, we don't want that. We want it to be 0. So let's go over here and change that. There we go. So now in our preview, they've lined up their leading edges, and they've got the same widths. Great. So in here, our frames aren't quite right. We can go ahead and make sure we've got something selected. So in this case, we can just select the larger view, the super view, and here we can, in all views in controller, update our frames. There we go. So I think it would be nice to make sure that we have the same size margins all around. And here what we can actually do is what we had on the slide. So in the slide, we said that we want the blue to have equal margins to the top, left, and right of the red view and to the view below it. So let's make sure that we have that. So there's a lot of stuff going on over here, and they're not really organized by view. But remember, we can click on the view and then look over here in our size inspector. So here we see only the constraints that have to do with this view, and this makes it much easier. So we have our trailing space. Now this is a little too large because that's what it was when we created it. So let's pick a nice number. 50 was what we had before. Maybe we want a tighter margin this time. So let's try 15. There we go. That looks nice. And let's see, bottom space to the super view. Now we don't actually want that. We want our spacing to be to the purple view. So let's go ahead and hit delete. Now remember, that doesn't delete it. That just turns it off. And that's fine, because that makes it easier for us to find it over here on the left. And then we can delete it from over here. But of course, now that we're missing it, the purple doesn't know where to go. So we've control dragged between them before, but remember that sort of uses the existing values, and we want to go ahead and just tell it right away to be 15. The interesting thing is it doesn't matter whether you pick blue or purple. We'll be able to create the same effect. So let's click on purple, and let's go to our pin menu. And remember, this is spacing to the nearest neighbor. And our nearest neighbor, if we check right here, is blue. And we can see our current distance is 71. But let's make it 15, because that's what our other one was. And while we're already in here, we can also tell it what its spacing to the bottom should be, because that's not something that it can infer directly from its relationship to the blue one. It can tell its width, but it can't tell how tall it is. So let's go ahead and add it to the bottom as well, and make that 15. And let's just go ahead and double check. There we go, it's going to the red. Current value is 26, but we're going to have it be 15. So now we've got those two constraints, and let's add them in. It's still not quite working. So why is this? So if you look over here in the preview, and we can zoom in a little bit, you can't see the purple at all. But you'll notice we've got our 15 here and 15 here, but down here it looks to be about 30. And again, the reason for that is because our purple, it's there, but it has a height of 0. But we told blue that it should be 15 away from purple, and purple is 15 away from the bottom. So it's just a space of 30 from the blue to the bottom because we can't see our purple. So what we need to do is we need to tell purple to have a height of some kind. And remember what I said before. We want our top view, the blue one, to be half as tall as our bottom view. Or, to word it in the other direction, we want the bottom view, our purple view to be twice as tall as our blue view. So how can we do this? We set up an aspect ratio for our red view between its own height and its width, but we can also set up an aspect ratio between two different views. But the way to do it is a little bit different depending on which aspects of those views you want to have an aspect ratio to. So in our case, we want the heights to have a particular aspect ratio. So we can select both of our views, either in here or over in the side menu, and then we want to come down here. In the pin menu, you'll see here there's an option for equal widths and equal heights. So let's go ahead and select equal heights. Now, I know what you're thinking, we don't want equal heights, but remember, we can change that. We don't want equal heights, but just add it and we'll see. All right, so we've added it. Well, it definitely made them equal heights. That's not exactly what we wanted, but that's okay. It starts out equal, but remember, we can edit most things. So here we can see it got added to the bottom. So let's just go ahead and click on it here, equal heights. And let's go over here. So our purple height is equal to our blue height. Okay, and we could play with a constant. How does that work with this? Okay, so it looks like a constant gets added to the first item. So it makes them equal, but then it makes the purple height 50 more than the blue height. We can see this even more if we make it 100. But we don't really want to do that. Again, that's a constant, and that creates a different effect on the iPhone and on the iPad. It doesn't have the right aspect ratio. So let's set it back to 0. Now, priority, we don't want to change that because we definitely want this one to apply. But what we can do is change the multiplier. Over here, this one is specifically called aspect ratio, and that's for from one view to itself. But we can still apply ratios to the multiplier. And you can remind yourself of that by clicking on this drop down. And you can see in the presets, there are some ratios here. So let's try some of them out. So we've got the 1, that's what we're at right now. Let's try 4 to 3. Okay, so now we say that if the bottom view, our purple view, because this is the first item, if this is a 4, then this is a 3. Now this might actually be 400, and that means that this would be 300, and so on. Remember, it's a ratio, not an exact number. And you can see that the proportions are the same now on both the phone and the iPad. Now here's a good place to see what the reverse multiplier does. So right now it's 4 to 3, but if we reverse it, now it's 3 to 4, and you can see that now the purple is 3 and the blue is 4. But again, we wanted it to be the other way, so let's go back. And we didn't really want 4 to 3. We want the purple view to be twice as big as the blue view. So that's a ratio of 2 to 1. There we go. So now we've got the ratio that we want, and that's perfect. Let's go ahead and come over here and update our frames just to make sure that we're not going to get too confused about what's actually happening here. So update frames. Great. You can see in here our spacing between views is a little bit off. So let's go ahead and check out what's happening in here and see how we can fix that. Okay, so it looks like we've got two different constraints for the same thing. Now, sometimes you might actually want this, but it looks like it just happened accidentally, probably when we added missing constraints. So we don't want this one. So let's just go ahead and delete it. Now, we can't delete it from here. It's a little inconvenient, but we know which one it is now. Vertical space 71 from purple to blue. So let's go back out. Oh, and it's actually already highlighted for us, so I guess that's a little bit convenient. So we'll select it again and hit delete. Now we can update our frames one more time. There we go. So this is getting closer. And it looks like we didn't quite get the spacing that we should have gotten down here. It looks a little bit big. And if we look over here, we can see it's because I accidentally made it greater than or equal to 15 instead of just equal to 15. So let's fix that as well, because right now it's allowing it to be more, but we want it to be exact. Nope, that didn't fix it too. Oh, so I see down here again, got another conflicting one. So again, so these are things that can happen when you're sort of experimenting with what you want, or you're not quite sure how to implement something yet. And you might end up with a lot of these sort of duplicate constraints that you don't actually want. So let's delete that one as well. Now, the one thing that we still haven't fixed was we didn't ever fix this leading edge constraint. So the one that we want to fix there is this one right here, this horizontal space from blue to red. And right now it's set to 29. But we can go over here and edit that to be 15. Looks like we're almost where we want to be. Now this one's standing out. Not sure if that was just a typo or from earlier when we added missing constraints. It was pretty close, so I didn't notice it before. But again, let's set that to 15 for consistency. And now we can see we've got a very similar situation to what we had in the slides. And we can rotate, and it should stay the same. So let's run it in the simulator. Looks good here. And when we rotate again, it looks great as well. But you might be saying, well, it's still a square both times, so as long as the red doesn't move, why would it be different? Yeah, and you're right. So let's go ahead and change the size of our red view. And hopefully this is where you'll see the real power of auto layout and how flexible it can be with dealing with these kinds of changes. So the easiest way to change the size of our red view right now would be to play with our aspect ratio. So let's go over here and click on aspect ratio. So again, right now it's 1:1. What we saw, we have some built-in multipliers. So let's try 4:3. Awesome. Okay, so our red resizes and everything inside it resizes as well while maintaining that 15-point margin that we created between things. And we can reverse the multiplier, make it taller. We can go the really extreme preset of 16:9. See, that's very narrow, but all the conditions are still being met. And let's go ahead and reverse it and make it super tall. And you'll notice that it's changing in here as well, and it would normally ask us to update these constraints, and that's why we're getting this yellow arrow over here, just telling us misplaced views. That's where it says things in here don't look the way they're going to look, so you might want to update your frames. So let's go ahead and do that. There we go, and we've gotten rid of those last warnings. One thing you still might notice is that since we've adjusted this multiplier, in the iPad view, we sort of lost that margin that we had. This is more than 50, and this is more than 50. Now that's because now that we've made it taller than it is long, the height and the aspect ratio is being treated as more important than our width. Remember, because we told it it's allowed to be greater than or equal to 50. But because we still want it to get as close to 50 as possible, we just need to go into our height and make sure that we make it big enough that it's able to max out and get as close to those borders as possible. So we'll go ahead and try setting it to 1,000. There we go. And now we've jumped up and we've gotten back to our 50-point margins on the top and the bottom. And then, of course, if we rotate it, we'll maintain that as well. So I hope that you have learned a lot. There's still so much more with auto layout that you can learn and play with. So many different combinations of constraints between objects. But for the most part, most objects will be treated by auto layout the same. It's just how you combine them, which ones are a child of which other ones. And I strongly encourage you to think of more things to play with, to add, throw in some labels, throw in some images, and just play with it, and you'll get more and more comfortable with working with auto layout. So now let's jump back over to our slides and just do a quick recap of the things that we've covered today.